The general election is a little over 7 months away, and President Trump has made no effort to conceal his disdain for the idea of mail-in voting. This weekend, he tweeted, "Mail-in ballots substantially increases the risk of crime and voter fraud." But in an op-ed for the Washington Post, former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper writes, "Logistical concerns can be resolved if preparation starts now, with one of the most important elections in our lifetimes on the horizon. Simply hoping for the best and taking a business-as-usual approach invites the sort of mess that marred the vote in Wisconsin." Joining me now is former Colorado governor and former 2020 presidential candidate John Hickenlooper. He's now running for a Senate seat in Colorado. Thanks so much for joining us. I'd love to get your reaction to that tweet from the president claiming that there is increased voter fraud, when I'm sure you've seen all the same studies I have shown, which show that there's less than 0.1% of voter fraud out there.
Far less than that even. And certainly the president doesn't always hold himself to the same set of facts that the rest of us use. We were able to use rigorous, self-limiting audits during the actual process of voting to make sure that there's no widespread or really any fraud affecting the voting. And, the notion that, A, you can get more people to vote, increase your turnout, you can do it in a way that is safe and secure. But most importantly, with COVID-19, we're not sure where we'll be in November, but this is a way everyone can vote. And what a lot of people forget is that in the old system, the people that man the polling places are often and disproportionately senior citizens who are the most vulnerable to COVID-19. So that's, what we saw in Wisconsin was just outrageous, right? And I can't, words don't describe what an American who cares about the democracy feels, and I think this is true of Americans all over the country.
I do, and I want to focus. I want to focus on Wisconsin. We had President Obama tweeting out sort of an iteration of something that I know you have expressed as well, saying no one should be forced to choose between their right to vote and their right to stay healthy, like the debacle in Wisconsin this week. What did Wisconsin teach us about the need for mail-in ballots?
Well, it was a screaming plea for help that every American should be able to vote and not worry about sacrificing their health. And this is one of those moments where we're 6 months out from the election. We have plenty of time to put in place vote by mail, all across the country. It's, relatively speaking, a very small amount of money to inject into the system. It becomes a form of stimulus, but it allows us to have secure elections at a lower cost. It's about $6 per voter less expensive. So if you're talking about a couple million voters in a state, that's serious money. And the bottom line is it is a way to allow everybody to vote safely.
Can you tell us how the process works in Colorado, how you make sure that this works for all Coloradans?
Sure. And, this is part of this is just that we should be all making it easier to vote. And that's what we tried to get to in Colorado. We have same-day registration, so people can, right up until Election Day, can register to vote and still vote in that election. We have automatic registration. When kids get their driver's license, they get registered, even though they can't quite vote then. All that is to make it easier to vote. And in our system now, every citizen gets a ballot in the mail, and they can sit at their kitchen table, decide who they're going to vote for, and then they have a choice. They can go vote on Election Day and drop it off at a polling place if that's what their decision is, if that's what they're comfortable with, or they could just pop it in the mail anytime in that 3-week period and make sure that they know it'll be counted. And there is a ability. We have a rigorous tracking system that makes sure that we track every single vote to make sure that we are protecting against any kind of fraud.
What you know and I know is that this relies then on having a postal system that is completely operational, which is now something that is in jeopardy. Mark Elias writes for the Washington Post, "For this system to work, states must be prepared to process and count the avalanche of ballots that will be postmarked by Election Day, but arrive at election offices in the days afterward. A push toward voting by mail will flood postal facilities with a surge of last-minute mail-in ballots." What does that look like, given the problems that the Postal Service is facing?
Well, we're not going to sacrifice the Postal Service during this crisis. It's a basic way that many people have of connecting with the outside world. Not everybody's on, wired up and on the internet. I recognize that the statistics have changed dramatically, but the Postal Service is not going anywhere. They obviously have had a huge drop off. Their revenues are off. Again, just like we're going to go out and help our business communities, just like we're going to have to fund our hospitals and our medical infrastructure, we're going to have to support the post office. So I don't think that's going to be a problem. In the 2018 election, we saw over 90% of Coloradans chose to vote by mail, and it wasn't all at the last minute. And we were able to set up systems to count those votes. You get so many votes in ahead of time that in a very meaningful way, many of the votes are fully counted before you get to 7 o'clock in the evening on Election Day, which is out here when we close the polls.
What is your sense, Governor, of what the president's resistance is to vote by mail?
Oh, I don't know. I think someone must have told him that somehow was going to make it harder for his reelection. And I don't see that. We saw when we first went to vote by mail, one of the first constituents we saw increased turnout from was senior citizens. And they're not always the most liberal voters. So vote by mail allows everybody to vote easily. And I think that's a fundamental principle that this country was built on. It's something we should continue to ensure and invest in to make sure that we are a representative and representational democracy.